Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you. At least Miss Jill wants me to have a Happy New Year. No, I get it. We're all dragging. Whether you stayed up till midnight or 6 o'clock in the evening, which feels like midnight these days, it's a long night, right? And so I hope you had fun with family, with friends, whatever you decided to do last night. Hope y'all had a good time bringing in the new year together. And, I hope you got to watch the ball drop. If you like to watch, I've never really cared much about that part. I just, as a kid, always loved it because we'd get together at the church building and all of us would play games and the parents would all play board games and we'd be playing a bunch of other crazy games all around the building. And so I always looked forward to it, loved it. I remember one year my dad, we didn't have a way to watch the ball drop at that time, and so my dad made an aluminum foil ball and tied it to a piece of string and roped it over a little ledge or something and slowly dropped it as we counted down. So we had our own little homemade ball drop there in the foyer. So it was pretty fun. But it's always a good time. It's an exciting time for people because it brings in new opportunities and potential to be better, because who doesn't want to be better this year than you were last year? We all wish we could be better in some way. Even if we were great last year, we know there are areas where we want to improve and grow. And so that's what we're going to strive to do as a congregation this year, is to be better as a whole. And that happens when each of us work individually on bettering ourselves and then bring that to the table to help better the congregation and let God use us to grow His kingdom and to glorify His name. So what we're going to do this morning, we didn't get to finish some thoughts from last week about the early childhood of Jesus. So what I want to do, and this suede jacket I think is catching my... There we go. What I want to do this morning is finish those thoughts up, and then if we have any time left, go back and talk about some key factors in the birth of Jesus that we didn't look at last week in the sermon that I think are kind of interesting and neat and important. And then next week, Lord willing, we'll be back in the book of Acts, picking up where we left off there in chapters 5 and 6. And so, sorry about the little 2-week plug-in here, but I thought maybe it'd be interesting to talk about. I mean, how often do we really talk about the early childhood of Jesus? How often do we really think about it? We typically talk about the temple part, but do we think about everything else? You know, Jesus was a little boy. Jesus had friends that he played games with. Maybe they played tag. I don't know. But I'm sure they did. I mean, he was a little boy. And it helps us, I think, to remember the humanity of Jesus. That doesn't take away from his deity, but it strengthens our connection and bond with him when we understand that he truly does understand. That's not something preachers say to try to make you feel better. That's just the truth, which should hopefully make you feel better, that Jesus gets it. He understands. You've been betrayed by a close friend. Jesus was betrayed by all, right? And two of them very publicly and powerfully when you think of Judas and Peter. You lost someone you love. Well, go read John 11 and look at Jesus and Lazarus. You been persecuted, mocked, rejected. You've been stressed and anxious. Go read about Jesus in the garden. As stressed as we've been, I don't know if any of us here, there might be someone here, have ever gotten to the point where our stress has led to us literally sweating blood, because our capillaries are bursting and blood is flowing. So that's not to take away from your stress, but that's to remind you that when you feel stressed and anxious, Jesus gets that too. He was fully human. And so looking at his early childhood, I think kind of helps us think about some of these things. And we talked about, just as a quick little summary here, of course, he grows up in Nazareth. At the age of 12, he accompanies his parents to Jerusalem for the Passover. You remember any key thing about the Passover and going to Jerusalem that we kind of focused on last week for a while? Okay. Yeah. So it was one of the 3 times that they were commanded to go, but who was commanded to go those 3 times? The men, right? So the men were expected commanded to go 3 times a year for the 3 feasts. Of course, you have the Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So those are your 3 feasts, or three times of year that people would go, the men would go. And notice that it's every year. And what's interesting is to say that the men would go is not taking away from the women, but it strengthens the faith of Mary when you read about it, because she was going. She did not have to. She could, but she did not have to go. How often today do people have the mindset of, well, I'm not going because it's not mandatory? Whether or not it's mandatory, that's kind of a terrible attitude to have anyways, isn't it? If that's our mindset and our focus is, well, if it's not commanded, then I'm not going. But whether or not it's commanded, even if you take that out of the picture, that's just an awful mindset. And it leads to kind of having the wrong heart in a lot of ways. And so it becomes a burden to serve God to some. Now, we're not going down the road of what's commanded or not commanded. We're not focusing on that part. It's just kind of the mindset. But for her, it was, I'm going. I don't have to. I want to. And that's what worship is. That's part of what worship is. It's a want to. It's a privilege that we get to come together, not a burden. But a lot of people view it kind of as a burden, and that's sad because it's very freeing when you remember that it's a privilege, and it's very rewarding. Our mindset should never be, what did I get out of worship today, or I didn't get anything out of worship. You ever heard someone say that? But it's interesting that when our mindset shifts to excitement because we have a chance to worship God and it's a privilege, isn't it interesting that we do get something out of worship? But when our mindset and our heart are wrong, we feel like we don't. And that typically means, well, you didn't entertain me. And so in looking at the early childhood of Jesus, I've never stopped, until we were talking about last week, I've never really stopped and thought about that part. The consistency and the fact that Mary wasn't commanded, but she went. Can learn a lot as you look at Mary. Jesus, of course, as they go to Jerusalem from Nazareth, they leave, and what do they notice? Yeah, Jesus isn't with them, right? And how long had they traveled without Jesus before it kind of clicked? It was a day, right? 1-day journey. And they realized, whoa, where's Jesus? And you might say, well, what bad parents? But remember, it's a whole family coming together. And I kind of gave the illustration of Home Alone, if you've ever seen that movie, which I think is a Christmas movie. But you watch that movie, and the parents are in a scramble to leave, and all the family's going together, right? They get on the plane, and then it hits the mom. Kevin's not there. This is not, I don't think, a reflection on the parental abilities of Jesus' earthly parents. I think this is just a big family leaving all together, and kind of just, if someone notices Jesus isn't with us, maybe they would say something. But it's just, and it might have been a little chaotic. You ever try to get a group of people to leave one location to go to another? I've got 4 people in my house, and it's a nightmare sometimes trying to go from one place to another. That's just with 4. And so you look at a massive group of people, and that it's easy to see how potentially you just might have overlooked that, Jesus is not with us. And so they go back, and what's Jesus doing when they go back? He's in the temple teaching. And at an early age, as Jesus is teaching, what does it say about those listening? Astonished and blown away by his wisdom at 12. Now, there's reasons for his wisdom at 12. Yes, he's God in the flesh, right? He is deity. But I do think that part of this, too, is a connection to the fact that his parents were going every year, that his parents were committed to the Lord. And if they're committed to the Lord, what's Jesus seeing in his home? Commitment to the Lord. What's Jesus hearing in his home? Probably conversations about the Lord. Today, we've got to have more of those. Yes. Absolutely. They were very special. They were picked by God. And of all the things we talk about with Mary, you ever think about, I wonder when she knew or how she would find out that Jesus was going to die how he did. And I wonder to know that you're bringing God's Son into the world, what a blessing and a privilege that is, but think about all that she carried with that. The mockery and the snickering, the whispers as she would walk to town to shop for groceries, as people talk about this woman who is with child, right? And you think about, as her son is causing a stir, people in the community would know. Remember, Jesus' own people of Nazareth, what did they do? Reject him. And so people would know who his earthly mother is. And if you're causing a stink, that's going to come back on your earthly family. Now, Jesus wasn't trying to cause a stink, but they were getting riled up and upset because people were listening and obeying Jesus, listening to and obeying Jesus. So Mary and Joseph, two very special people that God chose, and not perfect people, just like Moses wasn't perfect, and Noah wasn't perfect, and Abraham wasn't perfect, and David wasn't perfect, and you can go on and on and on, but they were people chosen by God, and what a beautiful thing. But Jesus is teaching in the temple, and that, I think, is a reflection of his deity, but also his upbringing. And for us, we can learn something about that as parents or grandparents even. And then, of course, Jesus does return to Nazareth and properly grows and matures. And if you want to open your Bibles to Luke 2. In verses 51 and 52 is how the chapter closes. It says, "Then he," that's Jesus, "went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject to them. But his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." In wisdom, that shows us that Jesus continued to develop and grow intellectually. In stature, that shows us that Jesus continued to develop and grow physically. In favor with God, shows us Jesus continued to develop and grow and mature spiritually. And with man is an indication Jesus continued to develop and grow socially. Jesus is growing in all these areas. And what a good blueprint for us to follow in our strive for growth. To grow intellectually, to grow physically, to grow spiritually, and to grow socially. All four of those areas are important. Jesus increased in these areas. So, let's think about some of these things. This is kind of where we wrapped up last week, but I want to think about some of these things here that we can take from this text and be better in our faith, build a better us. Number one, may we all be governed in raising our children up and in rearing our children and in influencing our grandchildren after the many helpful lessons we can learn from the silent years of Jesus' childhood. You think about, what do I mean by silent years when I say the silent years of Jesus' childhood? We don't know much about them, right? So it's the silent years. There's just not anything really written. Not that it wasn't important, but there's just not anything written from after he's born till he turns 12. That in-between time, right? So can we learn a lot from that? Number one, we can learn that he learned to work. He learned a trade. Look at Mark. Mark chapter 6. Verse 3. Says, "Is this not," talking about Jesus, "is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" So they were offended at him. So notice, he's identified as a carpenter. What did his earthly father, Joseph, do? Carpentry. So what could Jesus have been taught in the early childhood of his life? Carpentry by his father, which that's what fathers did. You have a son, you train your son to follow in your footsteps. You're a carpenter, they're a carpenter. You're a blacksmith, they're a blacksmith. You're a fill in the blank, they're a fill in the blank. And so Jesus learned a trade, learned how to work. May we strive to teach our children at an early age how to work, how to learn a trade. You look around today and people want to make the most money by doing the littlest work, don't they? It's kind of sad, and I saw something, and I probably should find a way to rewatch this commercial, but I just caught the tail end of what the guy was saying, and it was a company that helps you find a job, ZipRecruiter. Y'all know that company? I think that was the commercial. And I'm trying to remember how it was worded because I don't want to accuse this ad as saying something it's not, but the guy basically said, what I caught was, I found a job where I get to work 3 days a week and have 2 days off in the middle of the week, which is exactly what I deserve. Think about that. Which is what I deserve. And so now you have people coming out saying, I deserve this, so you better give it to me. And what's kind of sad too in the job market, when employees are getting harder to find, some people are getting those things. Now I've never liked talking money in jobs. I just don't like that part. And I'm sure a lot of you don't like that part either. Not that you don't like making money, but that you feel awkward talking about that part of it. But you have to, right? But a mindset of, oh, you better pay me this because that's what I deserve, or you better give me these hours because that's what I deserve, that just kind of shows you kind of where our culture is. And that's kind of what our young people are watching YouTubers. There are YouTubers right now that make more money than a lot of us combined together will ever make, and they're making it at 15, 14. And you watch their channel, and they're putting out the silliest videos that you've ever seen. Playing with puppets or just a bunch of crazy things. There were two kids, a brother and a sister, that lived in Pensacola when I was there, and one of our teenagers was at the building one day, and he started yelling, and when he ran in the building and was jumping up and down, he's like, I just saw this blue Lamborghini drive by. He's like, it's this YouTuber. He lives right down the road from the church building. So he got on social media and sent him a message, and they came in our parking lot, him and his sister, because he saw a blue one, and then right behind the blue one there was a pink Lamborghini. You know what the brother, he had bought himself the blue one. You know what he had done for his sister's 16th birthday? A pink Lamborghini. Teenager. Now, I'm not good for them, right? They found a way. But a lot of kids, they think, that's what I can do now. I'll just become famous on social media, TikTok or YouTube or whatever else. And we've got to remind our kids the importance of working hard and just learning how to do things and not just thinking things are just, here you go. And that's one thing with Jesus, that his Father taught him at an early age. Parents, don't forget to work with your children and teach them at an early age the importance of working hard and learning. Number two, in the silent years of his childhood, his early childhood, he had been taught to go to the house of God regularly. You look at Luke 2, verse 49, it says, he says, do you not know that I must be about my Father's business? Notice he said, why do you seek me? Why would he ask that kind of question in connection with the comment after, did you not know I must be about my Father's business? He's kind of reminding them, you've brought me to the temple all these years. We always come together, and in a way probably to Mary too. You know that who I am. You gave me birth, and the angel came and told you, and told my earthly father as well. So you know these things, but also don't you understand that I would be here because this is how you've raised me as well. And so he learned that at an early age. In chapter 4. Look at verse 16. So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Now, what is a custom? kind of like I don't mean the word in a negative way, but a routine, something that you do regularly. Remember in Daniel chapter 6, when Daniel in the lion's den, after Darius makes the decree that you cannot pray to any other name but his, what does Daniel do? It says he goes up to his room, he opens his windows, and he prays towards Jerusalem 3 times, as was his custom. You'll see sometimes in Jesus' earthly ministry, after he turns 30 and he's going through his ministry, it says that he would go up to the mountain by himself to pray, what? As was his custom. So Jesus was taught to be present with God's people in the synagogue. He was taught to pray, to study. These are things that we see later, but they happen in that early part of his childhood, the silent years, if you will. So he was taught a trade. He learned how to work. He had been taught to go to the house of God. He knew his Bible. Remember verses 46 and 47 of Luke 2. He's teaching in the temple. That's from study and growth in that knowledge. So he learned his Bible. He knew. Now, of course, then they did not have the complete Word of God. He didn't have a Bible like this that he opened up and read, right? But he knew the law, the old law that the people had. And he would study that. He knew it. He was obedient to his parents, verse 51, right? That's a reflection, I'm sure, on all the other times in his childhood as he knew better, right? Of course, as a little bit baby. I don't know. I feel like we sometimes think Jesus was born speaking in complete sentences because he was deity, right? But he was a baby, right? And when he knew right from wrong and those kind of things, it seems that he was a child that was obedient to his parents. When they come to him and say, "You're coming with us," what does he say? Verse 51. It says, chapter 2, he went down with them to Nazareth, and he was what? Verse 51. Subject to them. He was obedient to them. He was under their wishes. So another thing you learn about his early childhood. He was aware of his responsibilities. We read that in verse 49. He participated publicly in worship. We just read that in chapter 4, verse 16, when he stood up in the synagogue to read from the law. He also, as you kind of look at all this, he lays out this blueprint, we used that word a minute ago, of for us as parents to kind of look at to see, what are some things we need to be doing with our children, or what are some areas we need to focus on with our children so that as they get older, we've done our part to train them. We talked about it last week. Sometimes parents do everything they can, and they do everything right. And as their child gets older and makes their own decisions, they might leave the church. They might leave the Lord. But may it never be because we as parents failed them. May it never be because we didn't try and do our part. We have responsibility. And so just keep that in your mind as you think about this. Now, I get it. I look around this room, and a lot of you don't have kids at home anymore. Okay? And I'm up here with 2 that just turned 3, and you're like, what do you know about being a parent? I'll go ahead and tell you, nothing. Nothing. I think I get it, and then I realize I don't. But just as we look at the life of Jesus, these are things that the Bible can show us. Look at these areas with your kids. And those of you got grandkids, these are areas that when your grandkids are around you, go ahead and spoil them with all the candy and with the toys and all those things. But then look at these areas too, and just try your best to help be an aid to the parents in their journey to raise their kids to serve and love God. That's the early childhood of Jesus. May we choose Jesus as a model of properly maturing. Jesus, like we just talked about, grew in wisdom, stature, favor with God, favor with man. Use that as a model to show how we should mature. Like Joseph and Mary, let us never cut short God's requirements. Verse 39 of Luke 2. So when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord. Notice there's some big words there that are formed by shorter letters. So when they had performed, what's the next word? All. Don't overlook that word. Don't read past it quickly. That's important. When they had performed all things, okay, so they'd done everything according to the law of the Lord. So not only have they done all things, but the all things that's being referenced is they've done all that God commanded them to do, all that God required them to do. When they had done all the Lord required, they returned to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth. So let's not look to cut corners. Saul genuinely came to understand this when you read 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 through 35. It's not enough to believe and not be baptized. We understand that, right? Mark 16, 15, and 16, it's believe and, not believe or, believe and. So it's not just enough to believe. We must be baptized. It's not enough to obey the gospel, believe and be baptized, but then not add the Christian graces. What are the Christian graces? Do you know? Okay. I'll give you, yes, you started listing them. I'll show you where you can find them. And I might start and see if you can finish. They're in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 11. It starts this way, somewhat this way. Now add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, to knowledge patience, to patience godliness, godliness brotherly kindness. And then it goes on to say, if these things be in you and abound, they make you that you should neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So as you read those verses, that passage, there's a lot there. That's, if you ever hear someone say Christian graces, that's basically what they're referencing. That's what they mean if they use that phrase. They're talking about that adding to, right? And notice that it's a progression. You have faith. Now add to that faith some virtue. And add to that virtue knowledge. And to that knowledge, patience. As you grow in your knowledge, may your patience, your temperance increase. And as that's growing, may you strive to grow in brotherly kindness, in love, in charity, in godliness. All these areas you're adding to. And you're striving in all the areas. And when you have the Christian graces, we are not barren nor unfruitful. Now, what's one of the descriptions of Christians given to us in the New Testament, specifically in John chapter 15? Okay. What is one of the descriptions, one of the illustrations used to describe Christians in John, well, in the New Testament, specifically John 15? I'll give you a hint. Yeah, vine and the branches, right? So what happens if a branch, it's us, doesn't bear fruit, according to John 15? You remember? It's pruned, it's taken out, right? By God, the vine dresser, removed, bundled together with the other unproductive branches, and what? Burned, right? What is salt? So the branch's responsibility, bear fruit. When you don't do your responsibility, there is punishment. Just like in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, when salt loses its savor, what's it good for, right? It's therefore good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled under the feet by men. So we've got to fulfill our responsibility. As branches, we're to bear fruit. When we focus on these Christian graces and growing in faith and virtue and knowledge and temperance and godliness and brotherly kindness and love, when we try to grow in these areas, you know what happens? We bear fruit. We do our job. We fulfill our responsibility. We fulfill our purpose. Because as we bear fruit, we're glorifying God. And so those Christian graces are so important. We have to add these Christian graces. It's not enough to attend, to be present, but not worship. Ask yourself when you leave today, did you worship or were you here? Because they're two different things. You can be here and not worship. I know we're out of time. It's not enough to love in word. if we don't love in deed. Jesus said things about how he loved people, but even if he never did, you knew he loved people because of what he did. God so loved the world, not just because he tells us he loves us, but he sent Jesus. It's not just enough to love in word, but to love in deed. Thank you for being here this morning. I got to go grab the handouts for the sermon off the printer, fresh off the press. So I'll be back in here in just a second, and we'll put those in both lobbies. Make sure to grab one and enjoy some fellowship before we have worship.
He made